Welcome to today's meeting of the Adult and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is being held online due to the current situation. This meeting is being broadcast live to the public on YouTube, and for those that are not able to watch the footage live, the webcast will be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I please ask that all officers and members mute their microphones until they wish or are invited to speak? When you are speaking, please turn your video on. And if you are able to leave your video on, I think it's nicer if you're able to do so. I will now go around the room and ask members to introduce themselves. But just before I do so, I've received apologies from Mrs. Broadley, who is being substituted by Mr. Mullaney, and Mr. Harriston, who's being substituted by Mr. Parton. For residents out there, my name is Terry Richardson and I'm the chair of the committee. Can I first go to Mr. Crooks? You're on mute, Bill.
Sorry about that, I was muted. Yeah, Bill Crooks, present, Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gillard?
Yeah, President Chairman, good afternoon. Tony Gillard, Wiswick Division.
Mr. Mear?
Present Chairman, thank you very much. Joel Mear, Loughborough East.
Thank you. Mr. Mullaney?
Present Chairman, Michael Mullaney, Hinckley de Montfort.
Mr. Parton?
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. Mr. Parton, present.
Thank you. Mr. Poland?
Good afternoon, Chairman and everyone. James Poland, Syston Foss, and I can see and hear proceedings.
Thank you. Mrs. Amanda Wright?
Sorry about that. Problems with my mute button. Yes, Amanda Wright, present for Burbage Division.
And finally, Mrs. Maggie Wright.
Hello, Maggie Wright, present for the Stony Stanton and Croft Division.
It won't let me turn my camera up. That's it. I think I'm on now.
Right. Could I also ask Mukesh Barot to introduce himself?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Mukesh Barot, Chief Officer, Health Watch Leicester and Leicestershire.
Thank you, Mukesh. And we also have the Cabinet Lead Member and the Cabinet Support Member here. So could I ask them to introduce themselves? First of all, Richard.
Hi, Chair. I'm Richard Blunt, Adult Social Care Portfolio Holder, here for my last meeting.
And Christine Radford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had a job to get on. I had to go to IT to sort me out. Computer was updating in the middle of it. Thank you.
It's all right, Christine. I had the same problem. I only beat you by a few minutes.
All right.
Right. Thank you. We're now, just before I start, I know that Mr. Mullaney and Mrs. Amanda Wright have got items they might need to disappear before the end of the meeting to go to. So they have asked that I give their apologies if they have to leave before the end of the meeting, because obviously I wouldn't want to interrupt, if we're halfway through an agenda item. So if we just take a note of that, thank you. We now move on to agenda item 1, which are minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of January 2021. I propose the minutes of the meeting, which are on pages 5 to 10. Are we happy that I take them as read, confirmed and signed? No one to the contrary, thank you. Agenda item 2, question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. Agenda item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions from members. Agenda item 4, to advise of any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. I've not been requested or notified of anything urgent, so there's nothing under that one. Declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. I know Mrs. Amanda Wright wants to make a declaration.
Just in terms of the healthcare related agenda, obviously I'm a healthcare lawyer, and to that extent, I just have a personal interest.
Thank you, Amanda. I know we take it as read that anyone that is dual-hatted will be noted accordingly. Do I have any other members who wish to declare any interests?
I was only going to say, possibly, Terry, it's James Poland. I'm cabinet member at Charnwood Borough Council, and we're talking about museums later on. And Charnwood Museum is jointly run by Leicestershire and Charnwood, so I don't know if I have to declare that, but I thought I'd ask.
I think it's worth having it noted, James, just so there's no doubt that it's on the record.
Cool.
So thank you for that. Agenda item 6, I have no declarations of the party whip in accordance with the overview and scrutiny procedure rule 16. And under agenda item 7, I have no presentation of petitions under standing order 35. We now move to the main agenda items. As with all the following items, can I please ask members to allow officers to present their full report before taking questions? To indicate that you have a question, please use the raise hand function and unmute your microphone, and I will call you one at a time. To be sure everyone has their say, I will finalise by calling on all members to ask if you have anything further to add before we move on. So we now move on to agenda item 8, which is the provision of short breaks and supported living services, which is set out on pages 11 to 16. We've also had a separate document with comments from Dr. Inan as the local member, and it says, whilst the comments include some questions, Dr. Inan has confirmed that she did not wish for these to be dealt with under agenda item 3, standing order 7, as a formal question. I know John will pick up those questions in his presentation. I also aware that John has received a verbal question from a member as well, which he will also pick up, so it's reflected in the minutes during his presentation. So if I can now go over to you, John.
Thank you, Chair. So you will recall, Chair, and some members of the committee may recall, in 2018, the committee received a number of reports and representations in respect to proposals to refurbish the Trees residential care home in Hinckley and to re-provide the short breaks services in Colville. Today's report provides an update on the recommendations that were then taken forward to Cabinet and approved by Cabinet, and then also seeks committee's view on further options for the two sites. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Heather Pick and Claire Jones, who will take members through the report. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Yes, as John said, we've had a number of reports and recommendations agreed. In June 2018, Cabinet agreed recommendations for long stay residents to continue to reside at the Trees with an agreed refurbishment. They also agreed that long stay residential services at Hamilton Court, Colville be closed and a new short break service to be developed at the Hamilton Court Smiths Crescent site, and the use of the site to also consider supported living options. Plans and funding for the site were subsequently approved by Cabinet in June 2019 to indeed include short breaks, supported living and community life choices, formerly known as day services. So the refurbishment of the Trees was completed in December 20 and left us with 8 permanent places and 4 short break places. 4 individuals from the Trees, the 4 that were our only long stay residents, had temporary accommodation. We've now confirmed that they wish to remain in that temporary accommodation. They're well settled and happy with the provision that they've got, and they've confirmed that they will not be wanting to now return to the refurbed accommodation at the Trees. The new proposal then is to use the Trees to provide a total of 12 short break units. It's worth noting that through COVID, the short breaks facility at the Trees has been suspended and staff have been redeployed to other direct service provision, both short breaks but also domiciliary care. And they no longer, we would have no longer have any long-term units then at the trees, which is in line with the adult and community strategy going forward to provide short-term and independent living opportunities. For Cropston Drives and Smith's Crescent, you'll see in paragraphs 11 to 16, the development of the tender for phase 2, which is the rebuild, has been paused, and that's pending further consideration, which, if we are able to move forward with the 12 units at the trees, would mean we wouldn't need to have short breaks provision potentially on that unit, which means we could consider further supported living, again, which is in line with the adult and social care strategy, and would mean that we could consider a less intensive development and landscaping and a more homely environment for the supported living tenancies, which would be permanent tenancies, of course. Do you wish me to pause? I can see a hand up. Nope.
No, if you carry on, Heather, we'll take all the questions at the end.
Thank you. So moving on to the proposals. Just to say that the original plans for Copston Drive did provide for an intensive development of the site. As I've just said, we could reconsider that given the developments which wouldn't include short breaks. But also we do in the county have a real deficit for step-through accommodation for our transforming care and transitions from young people coming into adult care, to be able to prepare them for more independent living and make sure that the support that they can have provided in their own tenancies is fit for purpose going forward, giving them a much better opportunity to remain in the community and not need in the intensive care that they have needed through their education or through their transforming care secure accommodation. In addition to that, the in-house community life choices services through the pandemic have drastically reduced, and people have been provided with alternatives, one-to-one support in the community and support in their own homes. And what we have had a review of those people who have been attending the in-house CLC, and quite a lot of those people would not wish to return to those services and would like to continue with their alternative. So we do think that the pandemic has had an opportunity for people to rethink what support, individual support that they need and how they want to have that going forward. As I've said, if we move to the proposals and options, if the short breaks provision is extended at the trees, then we would have more than enough capacity for the current people who are using our short breaks across the county, and for any growth that we would want to put in to short breaks, which means that we would be able to support carers much more adequately, and if there were a growth in carer support needs, we would be able to accommodate that. The proposals then are to extend short breaks at the trees to 12 units, using the newly refurbed units in order to do that with no extra cost. That would give us a total capacity of 24 beds and 858 bed weeks we have already requested. The additional capacity would take us up to 1,248 weeks availability. We did have a question about reasonable bed occupancy. And what we have noticed is that the newer units and the purpose-built units, including the refurbed, the trees units, give us a better occupancy because they're more suited to people's needs. But occupancy is currently between 60 and 80%, and that mainly depends on the individuals who are residing in the short breaks and some of their requirements around space and one-to-one support. The paper sets out at paragraph 21 the required consultation and the discussions that we will need to have with the people who currently use short breaks and who would therefore have access to the increased capacity, but that being not at Colville, but in the other sites around the county. We will be also undertaking consultation with staff, as I've said, currently redeployed temporarily into other critical roles within the department, to talk to them about opportunities for their employment within their redeployment opportunities now or at the newly configured sites. And a consultation period will also allow additional time to develop further proposals for the future of the whole of the Cropston Drive Colville site and provide recommendations on the most appropriate utilisation. I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions.
Right, thank you, Heather. Just before we do that, John, you mentioned in the briefing earlier today that you'd had a verbal question from a member. Would you just like to, a comment rather than a question, would you just like to articulate that so we can have that minuted? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. So I had a conversation with Mr. Wyatt, who's a local member in Colville. Mr. Wyatt was obviously concerned about the proposals and how the proposals would affect his local community. One of the comments that he made was that he, while supporting the overall direction of travel that we're proposing within today's report, and we did have a conversation, as Heather noted, that there is a potential to have a less intensive development on the site in Colville. That being the case, Mr. Wyatt requested that we consider making appropriate use of the land space and particularly thinking about how any development would affect the borders of the site and the local neighbourhood, and think about appropriate screening to the site as well, which I think is something that we could do if these proposals were taken forward. So I think that's certainly something that we could consider within the planning. Obviously, it's not, I'm not a planner, but we could consider that in the planning. Just to reiterate the other questions as well that Dr. Einan raised, and Heather's touched on these. Dr. Einan was also obviously concerned that any proposals not to redevelop short breaks services in Colville would have an impact on people who live near to that site, and particularly those people who live nearer than perhaps they live to other sites. The report picks out the fact that there are a small number of people that would be affected in that way. Dr. Einan asked that we consider their transport requirements and support with transport, and clearly we would do that as part of the consultation process with each individual family. And then finally, I think Dr. Einan wanted some assurance that we would be working in concert with NHS colleagues around the development of any transforming care service that we might want to deliver. And Heather might want to add to this. Heather works very closely with NHS colleagues on the transforming care services, but certainly we would expect that would be a joint service between health and care.
Do you wish to add to that, Heather, before I take the first question?
Yes, so we have a directory of people who are looking to move from either education or hospital accommodation. And what we do know is that whilst we are successful in getting people out of those accommodations and into supported living, it is quite a big step for them to have their own tenancy, and even with support to take on the responsibilities of community living. And what we do know is that where people can have a transition step through facility, they are much more likely to long-term remain in the community and thrive in the community. So that's something that we would consider. But yes, John is right. We have a trajectory and it's joint with health, and we're working with our colleagues to make sure that we match the right people with the right accommodation and the right support for their future needs.
Thank you, Heather. Mr. Mullaney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was really just to welcome the report. Obviously, there was an issue at the start when the residents of the trees had to move out, but obviously now they seem to be happy in their new accommodation. And so if we're going to utilise the trees, then we should use it for the best for the community. And I think certainly a short breaks facility is needed more than ever. So I'd certainly welcome this as something positive for Hinckley in terms of the facility.
Thank you, Mr. Mullaney. Do I have questions for any other members? I see no raised hands. Could I just ask a quick one as chairman? In terms of obviously the fact we will have 3 of these facilities, have we done any mapping for users of these facilities to see what the longest journey is that is undertaken by any of those residents and whether that informs the distribution of these facilities?
Claire, do you want to pick that up? Because I know we have done some detailed work. Whether she can unmute.
Yeah, thanks for that, Heather. Yes, we undertook quite a detailed analysis last time when we went out to consultation back in 2018, which looked at all of the, as you said, all of the facilities and all of the journeys being undertaken. Actually, some people do already live closer to other services, and as part of the consultation, we would be looking to explore that in detail and take the opportunity to look at all of those services wider to see how we can make sure that we're utilising and maximising the occupancy based on people that are eligible for that support there.
Thank you, Claire. Mr. Blunt?
Yeah, I just want to put on record just my comments, because obviously the next meeting will take place, so I'm no longer the portfolio holder. There are just 3 things really. The first is the Trees residents had the choice to come back. All of you on this committee, and Heather, and in fact John and I met the families of those people, and they were adamant they wanted to come back, and we made the decision to allow them to come back. So it's really pleasing that they've made their homes elsewhere, and some of them close to me at Netherseal. So it's been a really nice story. That gives us the problem in one way of the future use of the Trees building, because obviously we spent a lot of money on it. So what we're not trying to do is just find a solution just because it solves the problem building, because as you know, everything about this has been people led all the way through. So the short breaks, location mapping has just been brought up. I mean, that's actually crucial to me. The one thing I'll ask anybody on this committee who's looking at this decision at the next stage, because we're only going to consultation at the moment, will be to look at the responses of those people using the short break service at Colville and to see how they feel about it. And the final problem, that's why the consultation is important. And the final part is that the Colville site was really very intensively developed. And that created a problem in some ways, Chairman, because we were trying to squeeze too many uses and too many things on there. Not only was that coming in very expensive because we were so intensively using it, but it just actually looked like we were trying to get too much out of a piece of land when we got competing uses for it. So there's lots of work to be done. The consultation will be crucial, Chairman, but definitely when it comes back to this committee again, the most important thing for me is to look at what people who use those short breaks facilities feel like about the scheme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. I don't think we've got any further questions. So I think if no questions for anyone else? No. So I think if I just summarise that, as I understand it then, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is that I think the thrust of the committee's comments is that we welcome this report, we welcome the general direction of travel, we look forward to seeing the results of the consultation which is taking place, and I think those very helpful comments that the portfolio holder, Mr. Blunt, has just made, I think we will keep at the back of our minds when we see that consultation, as to the way forward. But I think in some ways this has given us a problem, but a good problem, in that we may be able to do other things that we hadn't hoped to do to start with, or perhaps we might be able to do them in a better or more effective way. So welcome the report and look forward to seeing the consultation results going forward. Everybody happy with that? Right, thank you, John, Heather and Claire. We're now moving on to agenda item 9, which is care home sustainability. This is on pages 17 to 36. This is going to be handled by John and by Nigel Thomas, Assistant Director for Adults Communities. I believe that Kate Revel is also present to assist in answering questions. So I don't know who's going to take the lead. I suspect it's either John or Nigel.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just do a very brief introduction. Members will recall receiving a report in November 2020, at the time when the government were asking all local authorities to develop an adult social care winter plan, and we brought a report to committee with the details of that winter plan in terms of how we would support local providers in Leicestershire. And together with that winter plan, we also brought information on the sustainability of care homes and the risk to care homes. And there was a national self-assessment that we completed that we provided information to members on that had a number of areas of risk to the local care home sector within it. So that was in November. We were just going into the second wave of the pandemic, and certainly that second wave has had a significant further impact on care homes within the county. But also, of course, during that time, we've also seen the rollout of additional testing, and we've seen the rollout of the vaccine programme. So I think there are probably checks and balances within the sector that we'd want to update members on. So I'll ask Nigel and Kate now if they can take members through the report today, which covers a number of those issues. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So, as John said, this is looking at the position of care homes, and it also provides an update on supply of building extra care facilities in Leicestershire. So, just go straight into the main body of the report. Paragraphs 10 to 19 look at older adults, and the paragraphs there outline the trends against permanent admissions to care, temporary admissions and permanent placements. And this is set against the context of Scheme 1 and Scheme 2 support that the government agreed. Scheme 1 was where from March 2020 of new or extended out of hospital health and social care support packages for people being discharged from hospital. That was Scheme 1. And then in Scheme 2, which runs from last September to the 31st of this month, the government providing up to 6 weeks of funded care and support for people being discharged from hospital as Scheme 2. So the paragraphs there just note that the trend for the year of permanent admissions has been a reduction in admissions during the spring and autumn, but since September seen an upturn due to reviews of COVID-19 patients who've been on that COVID Scheme 1, which is NHS funded up until August last year. Temporary admissions from the community reduced during the early part of the pandemic, although there was an increase through to early September weekly admissions. But weekly admissions have since decreased and have averaged 7 through January 2021. For temporary admissions following hospital discharge, there was an initial increase at the start of the pandemic, peaking at an average of 32 weekly admissions in June. And then the number of admissions started to decline throughout the summer, reaching a low point of 17 per week at the end of October. And that's still higher than the 7 to 8 weekly admissions pre-pandemic. The numbers have subsequently risen again through the end of the autumn and winter periods, and are currently averaging, or in January, they were averaging around 25 a week. The previous report in last November, noted that the number of people in health-funded permanent placements was an increase of 56% from 134 on the 1st of February 2020 to 209 on the 1st of September 2020. And during the autumn and the undertaking of Scheme 1 reviews, this number is reduced from the peak of 209 to 171 on the beginning of January this year. Some people will have remained in permanent care, with funding switching from health to adult social care. And as such, there's been an increase of 5% of social care funded placements throughout the autumn, peaking at 1,495 on the 1st of December, following which there's been a small reduction to 1,460. Paragraphs 20 to 24 look at working age adults, and it gives a similar trend analysis for permanent and temporary admissions. And the report tells us that at the start of September, there was 327 people aged 18 to 64 in permanent placements. And this is subsequently reduced by a further 6% to just 307 at the start of January. Reviews of Scheme 1 COVID funded placements has had little impact on the downward trend in placements. And during the last 6 months, there's only been one permanent care admission per month, and a forecast of 15 admissions throughout 2021 will be a considerable reduction on the previous year's figure of 24. Paragraphs 25 to 32 outlines some of the key challenges facing the care home market, and these were extensively in the November report, and they're still very similar. So outbreaks of COVID, increased mortality rates, reduction in permanent admissions, mainly because I think people have, sort of feel that they would prefer at home provision rather than going into a care home. The volume of information and changing guidance received from the government, and cost pressures, certainly in the early part of the lockdown, around areas such as PPE or personal protective equipment. And there's been some improvements have been made, particularly around PPE, in terms of availability and price. The supply of PPE is now steadied, and providers delivering regulated services can order PPE free for their COVID-19 needs from a national portal. And the LRF has an emergency supply. So stocks currently are generally quite robust. And also improvements were made on the creation of COVID positive designated settings for people needing care in a care home when they were following a discharge from hospital. So these were for people that had COVID and they were put in a safe space within care homes. And again, the current position with that is that there is, as circumstances improve, there is capacity within those designated sessions currently. And we've continued as a council to provide support to the market as described in that November report. There are 8 homes, however, which currently are rated as inadequate within Leicestershire, and the authority's quality and contracts function works closely with the Care Quality Commission, or the CQC, to share information between partners, just to look at the issues where there are concerns with the provider and agree on actions to be taken, which will include, in some cases, making visits to the provider. And that ongoing work is being completed with all 8 homes to assist them to make the required improvements. Paragraphs 33 to 37 look at the intelligence gathering during this period, and details also some of the information and tools being developed to continue to manage risk and mitigate failure in the market. And the aim really is to do as much as we can to give an early warning system to stakeholders to alert where there might be impending problems, so that we can appropriately deploy resources to support. Paragraphs 38 and 39 confirms the ongoing engagement activity with the market, and we do a lot of work, and Kate's team do an awful lot of work in terms of weekly bulletins, focusing on key messaging, just to try and mitigate that sort of vast amount of information coming from all directions, and also telephone call-ins where providers can raise questions about what they're receiving and seek support. Paragraphs 40 to 42 just confirms the details with support given with regard PPE, and notes the free scheme which came into operation from September, and this is currently set to continue until June of this year. Paragraphs 43 and 44 summarise the 2 rounds of infection control funds and how that's been distributed. So round 1 of ICF ran from May to September last year, and payments equated to £1,011 per bed, and some 5 million of national funding has been distributed to Leicestershire care homes. But the reported total expenditure has exceeded the grant by some 7%. And round 2 is still in progress, with some 3.5 million, the full grant for October 2020 to March 2021, having been distributed. And again, whilst this is a significant sum, actual expenditure for the period is projected to be around 5 million, leaving the sector with a shortfall that the council is monitoring and seeking to mitigate. Paragraphs 45 to 49 just contain the current position with fee uplifts for 21 and 22. And that work to determine that fee uplift is nearing its conclusion. And there has been engagement with care homes to get information about those cost pressures and loss of income that they're experiencing. And the uplift is expected to be determined shortly. Paragraphs 50 to 52 look at some additional funds, the Rapid Testing Fund and the Workforce Capacity Fund. The national RFT, the Rapid Tested Fund, at a total funding in Leicestershire of 1.6 million, with a requirement to passport 80% of that to care homes. And that'll mitigate the costs associated with lateral flow devices testing between December and March of this year. And similarly, similar to the ICF, the Infection Control Fund, this must be spent by the 31st of March, but it's unlikely that the practice of testing staff twice weekly and the use of lateral flow devices testing to support visiting will actually come to an end in March. And the Workforce Capacity Fund was announced in February, and this is there to support providers to deliver measures that result in additional staffing capacity for the sector. And the amount allocated to Leicestershire is 1.2 million, and again has to be spent by the 31st of March 2021. It is worth noting the uncertainty of further additional funding following the end of that period and the impact that this could have on the sector. But we will monitor evidence from the sector about what their pressures are and feed them into regional and national work with a view to setting out the case for any further funding intervention. And we'll continue to support care homes with a range of measures where the authority is able to, given our own difficult budgetary position and consideration of the additional COVID costs in exceptional circumstances. Paragraphs 53 to 58 go on to look at the status with vaccination in care homes. And there was a national deadline of the 24th of January this year where all care homes should have been contacted and visited and had vaccinations. And 97% of care homes in the county have in fact been visited by a primary care network, with the vast majority of residents being vaccinated. Now, where these visits haven't been taken place, this is usually as a result of an outbreak in the home, which meant that they couldn't be visited. And subsequently, vaccinations will be carried out at those locations. And in terms of care home staff, as of the 19th of February, 68.4% of care home staff in Leicestershire had received their first COVID-19 vaccine dose. And paragraph 57 details some of the work undertaken to encourage the take-up of the vaccine. And these include frequently asked questions, webinars, and also targeted work produced by and for the Black and minority ethnic communities. Paragraphs 59 to 61 look at the area of workforce development and makes the point that recruitment and retention have been continuous pressures for providers throughout the pandemic. Providers have identified that issues with staff shortages have been due to things like sickness, people that may have had to shield, and also staff leaving the sector to take on safer roles. But the Council's Inspired to Care project has continued to support the external market via an attraction campaign and supplementing provider efforts by sending candidate CVs and leads for them to progress independently. And this work really continues to be received very positively. To date, since the start of the pandemic, over 6,000 applications and CVs have been sent, meaning that the vacancy rate in Leicestershire has reduced by some 2.5% from the previous year, and from 8% in 2018 to 2019, and 5.5% in 2019-2020. Paragraphs 62 to 69 look at the Care Charter and the Council's considering implications of the Residential Charter. And the overriding objective behind this is to promote safety, quality and dignity of care through workers' employment conditions. The Charter provides a set of standards for local authorities to follow when they're commissioning home care. And we're scoping options currently before determining whether a charter mark would be implemented across the county. Paragraphs 70 to 82 go on to the Extra Care Build programme. And previously, you'll know that the Council's indicated its commitment to the development of additional care housing schemes through its support for the Social Care Investment Plan. And these are delivered through both partnerships with experienced developers and potentially using our own assets and developing the offer. The latter of these will be presented subject to an options appraisal, aiming to determine how best value for money can be achieved. Extra care housing schemes that offer principally care and support for older people aged over 55, and it consists of providing care packages which are assessed by the locality teams to make sure that residents' needs, usually personal care, are being met, a wellbeing service and a waking night service. And the report sets out the current position with the provision of extra care and where future developments are likely to take place. And the data shows that there's been a small increase of people accessing extra care housing. And one possible rationale for this is because of the COVID-19 pandemic. People have been concerned about moving into new accommodation during this challenging period. And families may also choose to keep their family members at home. But whilst improving the situation across the county because of the work that is planned, it won't meet the additional capacity identified in the Social Care Investment Plan. Based on Housing and Economic Development Needs Assessment and the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, some 1,100 additional units are indicated to be required over the next 15 years. And this amount would be delivered through partnerships with, again, experienced developers, as we've said. As I say, we're looking at an options appraisal to look at how best value for money can be achieved. Paragraphs 83 to 96 look at a response to provider instability and failure. And during the pandemic, we have found increased risk of failure and instability, usually due to lower occupancies in care homes, lower levels of referrals and increasing costs to providers due to that initial use of PPE and developing new ways of working, and the risks of instability due to outbreaks, staff absences due to testing positive, even if they've been asymptomatic. But the indication is that there's no specific type of care home which would be classed as the most vulnerable to potential instability. But more homes are experiencing increased vacancy levels, and this clearly presents a risk to financial viability. In the last 12 months, we know that there have been 3 home closures in Leicestershire. One was a small working age adult home and closed because the provider no longer wanted to provide care. One was a small older person's home which closed due to vacancy levels and quality concerns. And there was a medium-sized home which closed due to quality concerns. So work is continuing to be underway to look at the future shape of the market. There's always going to be need for residential care, although the level of provision might change as homes maybe cannot sustain their present. Where appropriate, we would work with providers to support looking at considering changing their offer and moving slightly in a different direction to support people to develop independence as a step-through model, which is in line with the council's strategic direction. Paragraph 89 then details the risks around staff capacity as a result of testing regimes. Providers are currently testing staff weekly and residents monthly for COVID, and this has identified in some cases high numbers of staff who test positive. This means that they've got to isolate, which again puts providers at risk because of low staffing levels. There is support for all homes during an outbreak or any outbreak from the department's quality and contracts team and public health's infection prevention and control workers. And we give advice and support about how to mitigate all of that. We do use a variety of options to respond to provider failure, depending on the vulnerability and risks at home. And we continue to do that. And a small number of new posts have been agreed within the department to support provider sustainability, and they will have a market oversight where a provider is beginning to show the signs of becoming unstable. They would then coordinate and look at providing some intensive support to manage any quality concerns before it gets to the point where they're in crisis. Paragraphs 97 and 98 just reference the consultation engagement activity across providers, and paragraphs 101 to 2 just look at and make the point that, again, the ICF funds and the rapid testing funds will end in March, and the free COVID related PPE is due to end in June. But we've got no certainty as to what will happen beyond those times. But we are committed to considering reasonable additional costs where they've not been met through existing national and local funding streams. And we'll continue to look at those on a case-by-case basis. So just to wrap up this report, we're saying that the care home market has been substantially impacted, as John said, by the pandemic over the last 11 months. But despite the challenges, the sector has shown tremendous resilience, commitment and determination through this period. And they really have, providers have been outstanding in working closely in partnership with the council to provide safe, quality care to vulnerable people in the county. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Before I take questions, could we just minute the fact that Mr. Mullaney and Mrs. Amanda Wright have had to leave during that item, so it's known when they disappeared. The first question is from Mr. Mear.
Thank you, Chair. I think this report is very comprehensive, goes through a lot of areas and outlines broadly what's happening in the care sector in Leicestershire at this moment in time. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. Firstly, it's the Scheme 2, which ends on the 31st of March, where funding has been provided by the government and we're passporting it over to care homes. And it's quite a substantial amount of money, 5 million in the first scheme and now 3.5 million. But it all ends on the 31st of March. You've touched on it, Nigel, in your report, but COVID hasn't gone away. We all seem to think that it's gone away, but it hasn't gone away. And care homes and care settings will be under pressure. Care staff will be under pressure. So you've said that on a case-by-case basis we could help, but if more and more care homes are under financial stress because of falling numbers, because people aren't taking up the places, how are we going to support? Maybe we will support one or two, but how are we going to support the third and the fourth and the fifth down the line on that one? So if I can ask that first question, Chair, first, and then the second question on a different one.
Okay, John, did you want to pick that one up? Or, I mean, it is a very difficult position. There is that element of uncertainty. I think we're going to have to be very flexible in our response. We don't know currently whether there's any other plans to provide additional, additional support. We do know that, sort of, it's, quite right, COVID's not going to go away at the end of March, and providers will still be struggling. And, sort of at the moment, we will have to be very responsive and flexible to how we deal with that. We will continue to have close contact and engagement with providers. We've sort of referenced in the report weekly bulletins and briefings just to get a feel. And we do know where the cost pressures are being picked up. But I don't know whether John or Kate wanted to add anything to those thoughts.
Yeah, I'll invite Kate to come in a second. I suppose the first thing I'd say is there are a number of risks with the sector that Nigel's pointed out throughout the report, and largely over the course of the last 12 months, the biggest significant risk has been to the welfare and the well-being of residents due to the COVID pandemic, and sort of managing that through the infection control processes that have been put in place. And to support that, both ourselves and the government have given quite a lot of additional funding to the sector. But as we get to the end of the year, we're in a position whereby we have an average vacancy rate of just over 20%. The normal average vacancy rate would be around 10%. So there are double the number of vacancies that there would normally be, and therefore significant reduction in income. At the same time, if you add together all of those additional government grants and all the additional money that the County Council have given over the course of the last year, that probably works out to be an increase of about 8% overall in terms of the costs and fees payable. So we've kind of offset that reduction in occupancy by giving additional funding to the sector to cover that. The problem we've got now is that we get to the end of March and a lot of that government funding ceases, or at least we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's happening beyond the end of March. We know that the PPE fund ceases in June. The infection control fund ceases at the end of March. A number of the other workforce grants and the other grants that Nigel mentioned. So the significant risk moves really, I think, from being one that is all around the welfare of the individuals, which is absolutely right. That's where the focus should have been for the last 12 months. The risk now is shifting towards financial risk for the sector, because if that additional 8% cost isn't met, those vacancies will continue to be there. And as we go into the next 12 months, some of those additional costs in terms of workforce costs, PPE costs, infection control costs, they will continue to be there. So I think this is a significant issue that needs to be addressed, certainly within the next few weeks and months. We need to understand what the government are going to do. We need to understand what position the County Council is in. But at the moment, it's a significant risk.
Okay.
Kate might want to add to that. Yeah, just to add a little more, we're in constant contact with other authorities, particularly throughout the region, but to a certain extent nationally. And there's quite a bit of research being undertaken at present around the sort of pressures that are emerging locally within Leicestershire, but to a lesser or greater extent throughout the region and throughout England. And we will continue to monitor that evidence from the sector, which we're either asking them for through engagement activity or they're proactively coming to us with about their pressures and feeding that back into regional and national work about the sustainability of the sector. One key area that they're looking at the moment is insurance for care homes, and of course this will be something that feeds through to us over the next several months as homes have their premiums considered and renewed. And what we need to do regionally and nationally is to set out the case for ongoing funding intervention using some of this evidence. And we will of course continue to support care homes with a range of measures. We're putting in a huge amount of non-financial support or through officer time, which does of course have a financial element to it. And as stated within the report, where we're able to, given our difficult budgetary position, we will consider additional COVID costs in exceptional circumstances. But I think one of the key things to highlight is that we will continue to collate that evidence. Some of it's given within the report around the additional money that care homes have spent on infection control fund, which is evidenced within the returns that we've been making back to the department nationally. And that in turn, alongside other authorities, will show that the sector is spending a significant amount of money
over and above what the support is and is likely to going forward. So I think there is still quite a bit more that needs to be done over the following months to collate that evidence and set out a case to government alongside other authorities for sustaining the funding for the sector going forward.
Yes. Thank you, Kate. Mr. Mayor, would you like to ask your second question?
Yeah, the second one is just more of a statement, really. It's the care charter. I think we discussed it at our last meeting, and I think it's important that we do, regardless of what happens in May, that we pursue that in the summer, in the June meeting. I think it's very good. It's a very good statement for Leicestershire to have. But I understand we need to explore it and implement it correctly. But look forward to seeing that in future report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mrs. Wright.
Sorry, couldn't get off mute. Thank you. I think, as Jewel just said, it was a very comprehensive report and really comprehensive answers. So I think you've more or less captured what I was going to ask. My question was really just around, have we got any large linked groups of care homes? So my thinking is, if one suddenly decided to cease trading or something for the various reasons you've mentioned, where that would leave us? Would it leave us particularly vulnerable? I'm thinking back for 2 or 3 years ago now, I think, when we had a major care provider that collapsed, and I don't know if you could just clarify that, please, John or Nigel.
I'll start and then I'll hand over to Kate, if that's okay. So you'd be aware, possibly, that it's been reported in the newspapers recently, last week, I think, that HC1, who are the largest care company in the country, are selling 50 homes. We do have HC1 in the county. We have 2 or 3 care homes, none of which are part of the 50, I have to say. So that's comforting. But Kate might want to talk about the makeup of the sector and where the risks lie there.
Yeah, just with regard to the HC1 position, we are just trying to be especially clear by liaising with HC1 around whether there are any people from Leicestershire placed out of area in HC1 homes elsewhere. So we're just trying to clear that off. With regard to the sector overall, it is comprised of large national organisations with a local presence. There are some more regional or sub-regional organisations with locations in Leicestershire, and there are also some often family businesses with just 1 or 2 locations within Leicestershire. And I think what's beneficial about that sort of makeup is it does provide some resilience. There is a range of offerings there, including the size of the homes as well. And each of them will have their own particular areas of resilience, but also areas of pressure. So larger organisations, to a certain extent, may be able to offset some risk in certain areas across their organisations to the extent to which they're able to do so. Local organisations may be able to flex and adapt their local policies to be more resilient, but on the other hand don't have that wider financial base. But we are constantly in contact with other stakeholders within Leicestershire and the region, so Care Quality Commission, the other local authorities and other organisations, including in some circumstances emergency services, around the intelligence from the market not only being given to us by providers, but also that held by other organisations, to the extent to which data protection regulations, of course, enable us to do that. And what that does is gives us a really rich picture of the market at any time and gives us an indication of where there are risks present. So, there will always be things that come out of the blue, so to speak, but we do have a really solid base for intelligence, not only of our own, but those of other organisations, which is shared with us, and we're able to get an early heads up quite often in some of these issues that arise, particularly with national organisations.
Thank you, Kate. Mrs. Radford.
Thank you, Chairman. I just really want to say, under the extra care build, before the COVID, I was out and about to see what county were doing, and I was able to speak to residents who were extremely happy with what we'd been carrying out for them. And in one case, we'd used Ruth, who was one of our users, for her advice and taken that on board. And bearing in mind of what the other two have just said, that yes, I thought this was a good report and fully explained.
Thank you, Christine. Any further questions for any members? Right, thank you for that. We're asked under paragraph 108 to note the analysis, which I think is, I think has been said already by members, particularly Mr. Mayor. It's a really good snapshot of where we are. It also then asks us to consider any comments about the support. Now, I think it's come across, and I've always been very impressed pre-COVID even with the support that we as a council provide to our care homes and the team that do that. I mean, I was fortunate to go out on a visit to some care homes with the portfolio holder, Mr. Blunt, where we actually saw some of those people in action and the sheer support and work they do with care homes to ensure that they are as effective as possible in the work they do. And I think this report does illustrate the additional work this council has undertaken, which I hope all members agree to continue to support and look after those care homes and to understand where we are and the shape of the business model going forward. It is clear that this will come up to this committee a lot, but I think it would be wrong not to at this time thank all of those staff involved in supporting the care homes with everything they've done, which I think has been a credit to this council, and I hope members will agree with that comment. So thank you for that. We'll now move on to agenda item 10, which is Museum Accreditation. This is on pages 37 to 266. I would ask members not to panic, because I'm sure that John or Nigel, when they do this presentation, will not go through all the appendices and will assume we've read those. So this is in the very capable hands of John Wilson, Nigel Thomas, and also they have Fran Wills from the Adults Community Department who looks after this area, available to answer questions. So I don't know who's going first. Are you doing a brief intro, John, or is it straight to Nigel?
Just to basically say, this is a report obviously looking at the future accreditation of the County Council's Museum Service. It's fair to say that we would have been bringing a report some time ago had it not been for the COVID pandemic, and the current accreditation would have run out some time ago. So this has been delayed and deferred by Arts Council England. But we are in a position now where we really do need to think about what our future strategy and direction is. So the report today takes members through a bit of history in terms of where we've got to, but then more importantly, thinking about where we want to go in the future with our museum service. So Fran and Nigel are going to take members through that report. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm very shortly going to pass on to Fran, who's done the work on this and is very close to it. So what we're asking for is just to note the review of activity undertaken by the Museum Service, which relates to the last accreditation period. And that's set out in Appendix B and C of the report. And then asking for comments on the review activity to help shape and inform the work of the service over the next few months to prepare for resubmission of accreditation. But we're specifically also asking for comment on the vision and purpose statements which are collated in the report, the collection themes by which we sort of collect artifacts and pursue building up those collections, and future collecting priorities. And also for comments on the access policy statement for anything to be considered as part of the review. So I'm going to pass over to Fran, who's prepared this report, and she will take you through it. So over to Fran.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, Scrutiny members. As Nigel and John have said, this is around the work that we're starting now, really around preparing for our renewed accreditation application. So as summarised, it's around appraising scrutiny on the scheme itself, the accreditation scheme, highlighting the work that needs to be done to review policies and procedures, which will take place over the next few months. And we're inviting scrutiny members to comment on any aspect of that to help inform our review work. The policies are contained in the very lengthy Appendix A, and we're looking to take updated policies back to Cabinet in the autumn for approval. It also updates you on work that's been undertaken during that previous accreditation period in the Appendices B and C, and for you to comment on any of those as you deem appropriate. As John has alluded to, due to administrative issues and the impact of COVID on the accreditation programme, our call to submit has been delayed by Arts Council England, and we have had our accreditation status extended in the interim. As you see in paragraph 9, we're expecting an update on that from Arts Council in April. But at the current time, we're working on the basis that we will be resubmitting in January 2022, but it's possible it might be further delayed. And that's why we've made kind of a proposal in paragraph 29 that we extend our current policies and procedures to cover 2020 and 2021. As you'll see on the documentation, they effectively expired due to review in 2019. So what you'll see is the paper provides information about the standard itself in paragraphs 4 to 10. The standard covers all aspects of museum delivery, and it's split into 3 main sections. So it looks at organisational health, managing collections, and then users and their experiences. And paragraph 10 gives you a bit more detail about what each of those sections involves. And we are asking scrutiny members to comment on any aspect of that, but specifically, as Nigel's alluded to, the vision and statement of purpose, which you can find in paragraph 12. The collecting themes and the future collection priorities, which is in paragraph 18, and also the access policy in paragraphs 22 and 23. I believe the service has worked quite hard over the past 5 years during what's been a period of significant change for us to continue to offer a professional museum service to Leicestershire and seek to meet the needs of as many people as possible. What you can find in Appendix B and C is the many ways that the service has done that by continuing to ensure a varied and an innovative programme of engagement whilst maintaining those professional standards of care for collections. And there are a few examples of this work highlighted in paragraphs 28A to I, and I think give a sense of the breadth of that activity. And also, wherever possible, we have drawn down external funding. We've been quite successful, which has enabled us to enhance our work and kind of expand the council's investment. I just wanted to reference really that the pandemic has enabled the service to think about how we reach different audiences and also how we use digital technology to greater effect. There's been investment in recent years, as you'll see, as the service has launched microsites for most areas of our activity. And we're also developing good interaction with audiences through social media platforms. One area of omission really is we don't have a microsite that covers specifically our museum collections, and that's something we're looking to develop during 2021. And also during the pandemic, we've had projects such as Do You See What I See and #isolated but inspired. And that's seen the service work with audiences that don't traditionally visit our sites. And we've been able to have a conversation with those participants that's really deepened our understanding of what's important to the people of Leicestershire today, but also enabled those people who have taken part to strengthen their understanding of what it means to live in Leicestershire and what they value about their culture and their locality. There's much for us to do as we start to recover more aspects of our service over the coming months, and we expect a blended approach, i.e. physical engagement and visits alongside virtual continue to be a direction of travel. I think there was a question raised around how we promote access to our collections, and we see that by continuing to promote our publicly accessible sites, but also those targeted programmes of work that we do through the audience development team that really give us an opportunity to reach out to audiences that perhaps find it difficult to visit our sites or perhaps have barriers to that. We also work with creative learning services, which is part of the service, which particularly works with schools and enables schools and pupils across Leicestershire to have access to heritage and cultural resources in the classroom. We work really closely with the County Council's media team around kind of press releases and targeted advertising. Those digital platforms will continue to be a really important way of promoting what we do. We are working in partnership with the tourism partnership between the County Council and the city around the Uncover the Story marketing campaign. And we'll particularly continue our partnerships with a whole range of different partners, whether that be through universities, community partners, but also, as I think somebody alluded to at the beginning, our partners in Charnwood Borough Council and Harborough Borough Council, where we deliver those museums in partnership and they help promote that activity. I recognise there's an awful lot of detail in this report, so I wonder whether it's best to pause there and perhaps respond to any questions or look at any aspect in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Fran. Does anyone have any questions? Right, Mr. Poland.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation, Fran. Just history and museums has always been a passion of mine since I was a weirdly young kid. I used to love going to museums and so forth. So local history sometimes I do have a particular interest in. I understand we have quite a lot in our collection that's not currently on public view. Have we considered doing like an online museum where people can go online, look through some of the stuff that maybe isn't so publicly available, that would be best for people who can't get to museums, or maybe at museums on the other side of the county, so that they may not even know sort of exist there? And sort of a second question, to what extent do we share resources with the city? So obviously we'll have things that are unique to the county, and the city will have things that are unique to them, but there's quite a lot obviously that will be crossover. So for example, the Thomas Cook would be as relevant to city people as it is to county people. So to what extent do we sort of share those resources so that maybe some of our collections can be put in the city where there's capacity and where perhaps county people can see it, and vice versa, if the city have anything that would be more relevant to us in the county?
Am I okay to respond, Chair?
Yeah, please.
I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. I don't think it's weird at all, because I'm weird too. Yes, we do. I mean, I think one of the things that we recognise as a gap at the moment is we don't specifically have a website that focus on the collections that are effectively in reserve. There are a whole wide range of ways that we make them accessible. So most of the collections are rotated regularly. We have when we're open, we have a programme of temporary exhibitions, so things change around so that different things are there. We do have some information available online so that you can search through sort of curated elements of those collections, and you can order some of those images if you want to. But I think really our next step is really to have a digital platform that allows us to provide some of that content in a much more accessible way. In terms of partnerships with the city, but with others, absolutely spot on. We have all museums have a really clear collecting policy, so we try not to duplicate, and we've always worked really closely with the city over what they focus on and what we focus on, so we're not collecting the same things. And certainly there's been some work recently around where we've just kind of checked both sides of the collection to make sure the right things are in the right place. We have a loans policy. We're really keen to promote loans. So as you'll see, I think it's in Appendix C, you'll see some of the kind of key loans that we've made between different organisations, so those collections get out there. In terms of Thomas Cook specifically, that collection came into the Record Office, so that's actually a partnership already with the City Council and Rutland County Council, and we already know that the city are planning 2 exhibitions for the summer of this year where items from that collection will be put on display. So I think all of those things are really valid, and we try to do as much of that as we can, and I think we continue to aspire to do more, really.
Thank you, Fran. Mrs. Wright.
Thank you. Thank you, Fran. It was just a bit of clarity, actually, because I read, and don't ask me where I read it because I didn't note the point down, but it mentions unprepared archives and the fact that we no longer take unprepared archives. So does that mean if somebody offers us a collection and it's unprepared, we don't take it? Or so could we, be missing a gem or something like that. Just a bit of clarity around that, please.
I think that's specifically in relation to contract archaeology and archaeological deposition. So part of the planning process, as you're probably people are aware, sometimes requires developers to undertake some form of archaeological investigation, and they are expected to deposit that with a registered repository. So the registered repository for Leicestershire is Leicestershire Museum Service. But if you have an unprepared archive, so and when we say prepared, that's around making sure that finds are properly catalogued and marked, that they've had some conservation work before they're submitted, because it could be anything from just a paper document or even a digital submission through to organic material, a whole range of finds. You can imagine if that comes without any classification or preparation, actually it's practically useless to us, because we wouldn't be able to find anything. So it's around reasserting, and that's part of the expectation that's set for archaeological contractors. And we have in Appendix A, I think you can see the standards for contractors in there about what they're expected to prepare in advance. So that's all sent out when that's set up. They get those standards, and we do expect them to come in at that point. Is that okay?
Yeah, fine.
Mr. Parton.
It was a comment because actually I had quite an interesting experience with the Museums and Libraries Service, because there was a call for participation in the certainly in Loughborough with the 800th anniversary of Loughborough Fair, and the markets, the charter, and because of my sort of unique interest, and I knew I'd got some contacts that would be able to feed a lot of information into that. I worked with them quite a lot and still am, and I found it very interesting to almost be someone that actually takes part in an information gathering exercise, and it'll be fascinating to watch it come through to completion. But so far, it's been very organised. And the interesting thing is that I've had no contact from the Loughborough aspect, the Charnwood aspect of it, but I have with the county. So one would presume that I'm watching the process, seeing how it works, and following it through to completion, because I'm actually submitting material to it. But I've also managed to find lots of people who, again, have got a lot more information and give them quite a lot of contact. So this will be interesting it's fascinating to be part of something from its conception through to completion. And I've been very impressed with your service so far. It's very communicative.
Thank you. I'll pass that back to officers, and it's a nice one to mention actually, because that is something we are doing in conjunction with Charnwood Borough Council. So there's a part of that project which is going to be led by the Borough Council, which will take place in the town hall, and then I think probably sounds like you're involved in the co-curated element that we're kind of leading on, but with support from Loughborough local studies volunteers as well. So it's a nice way really of bringing together a range of assets to kind of deliver some outcomes rather than somebody trying to do it on their own. So yeah, we're really excited, and I think we're just really disappointed that because of COVID, people haven't physically been able to come together to share some of that, but soon, hopefully.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Fran. Any further questions? I'll just comment as chairman. As Fran knows, I'm a devotee of the collections. I've had a very interesting visit to the store at Barrow and the Eastern Annex, and had a very good look around the records office, which was truly fascinating and something I wish I'd done 25 years ago. And that really is my point of how do we let people know that we have this, and is there any way we can ramp up our activity? I mean, it strikes me as John knows, and I think Fran as well, that I'm a great devotee of as much access to as many people as possible. And there's a whole swathe of southwest Leicestershire which has no easy access to a museum or anything of that type. So, you know, because we've only got a few museums. So it's a question of, you know, how can we make it more accessible? I read again, like Maggie, I can't remember the page number, but I read on one page that there were 68 sessions done in schools, but it only covered 400 children, i.e. an average of 6 point something children a session. And it just strikes me that surely those sessions should be done, you know, for 30 or 60 or 100 children at a time rather than 6. So it's a question of, you know, all we would do is, and I don't think we have the answers, is, you know, I think we have a fabulous collection. I think we have a fabulous resource. I think we have a massively dedicated team that look after it. And I was very impressed with the people. And all we was urge is if there's any innovative ways we can find to make it more accessible, I think I believe the committee would support that.
Thank you.
So thank you all for that one. We'll now move on to the final agenda item, which is the framework for integrated personalised care, which is set out on page 267 to 298. And this is with John Wilson and Tracy Ward, who's the Assistant Director and Assistant Director in Adults Communities Department. And we also have David Stanton, a project manager, who's also available to assist in answering questions. So is it a short intro from you again, John?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So the framework for integrated personalised care is a replacement for an existing protocol that we've had in place since 2014. Essentially, it's to enable us to work collegiately with our health colleagues to meet people's needs and to avoid getting into situations where we sort of argue about whether it's a health bath or a social care bath. It's that sort of territory. It's quite important. And it's quite a dry topic, but it is actually quite important. So I'll invite Tracy to take members through the report, and then if there are any questions, I'm sure Tracy and David can respond.
Thank you, John. Just to give some context, the latest version of the Health and Social Care Protocol was 2014. There has been a protocol in place since the early 90s where we've sought to ensure that people receive services that maximise their independence and meet need without having duplication. But to give you some context related to the delivering wellbeing and opportunity in Leicestershire, paragraph 3 specifically picks up on some of those key elements that we aim to work more effectively with the right partner and to build effective support for the people of Leicestershire, that we ensure that there's collaboration across services and avoid duplication, as I've alluded to, that we integrate with partners to deliver integrated health and social care at a place level. So that builds on a strategic level of delivering across primary care networks. Paragraph 4 provides members with the time frame, and as John stated, the current protocol came into being in 2014, but it also provides you with details about those partner organisations. So that's across health and social care commissioners in Leicestershire, but also through provider units, so LPT and UHL. At paragraph 5, it was agreed that we needed to ensure that what the previous protocol 2014 delivered was that care and health was an integrated service delivery model. It was effective and it was appropriate and timely and safe to deliver those services. So some of those elements could be delivered via health partners and some via social care. So back in 2019-20, there was a plan to revise the health and social care protocol across partners, and that process started, and obviously then there was the COVID pandemic and some of the work stopped and recommenced in 2020. But to give you just some of the context of that, the review started to unpick some of the things at paragraph 7 that were working well or that needed to be refreshed. So just to pick up some of those things, a shared care agreement was still needed, but the current task appeared outdated in respect of supporting people with more complex needs. There was further training that was required. It would be fair to say that training has been impacted by COVID-19. Sometimes what we were looking at is to always seek to improve the patient experience. So again, it was about the right person delivering care and support to the person at the right time. And because we've had such a turnover of staff across health and social care, some of the partners at a frontline level didn't recognise some of the components of the current health and social care protocol. So in paragraph 10, the purpose of the framework is to support the undertaking of tasks on behalf of partners. So again, if it's right and safe and effective to do so, that could be done by whoever was delivering support in somebody's own home or in a care setting. And at paragraph 12, it outlines the two elements of the integrated personal care framework. Part A being the principles, duties and national guidance related to what health and social care can undertake. And part B is more realistically related to commissioners of services, those people that would be delivering integrated care and how we'd commission that and appropriate decision making in respect of that. So those are the two attached documents. At paragraph 13, we identified the need to look at the future training needs of individuals. The current training need is delivered by LPT and it's currently funded through the Better Care Fund. So moving on to governance at paragraph 14, whilst there's no lower limit on the support that healthcare can provide, the Care Act stipulates that it places a lower and upper limit on the provision of care funded by the local authority. So what the local authority can do is outlined in the report and is set out in part 1 of the management guidance, just so that people at senior levels across organisations are aware of that. At paragraph 15, the process of dispute resolution is identified and the Integrated Commissioning Board is the vehicle to address that. What we've tried to do is align disputes to the process that currently exists in relation to disputes that are escalated through hierarchies in partner organisation, and it follows the same process as the continuing healthcare process. In respect of overall governance, it's outlined in paragraph 17. For the County Council, this will be with a view to taking the revised integrated personalised care framework to the Health and Wellbeing Board, and it's my understanding that the next meeting of that is in May. So the integrated personalised care framework seeks to provide value for money. In paragraph 11, I've outlined that we already have a process by which shared care is agreed and the escalation process in respect of that. It's also key that what we want to do here is to look at commissioning support at the lowest possible level, and that being an MDT decision, and that funding, if it needs to be addressed, is dealt with outside of that. So people who are receiving integrated health and social care services shouldn't see that those discussions potentially are happening in the background. So there's no change to their service delivery. And again, it removes the need for delegation. So the timetable for decisions is set out in paragraph 22, with partner organisations also undertaking similar work to that of the County Council in respect of governance and sign-off. And just in conclusion, the report describes the work undertaken to date and the proposed next actions. And committee are asked to provide any comments in respect of the report and the presentation provided to you. But before that, I'd just like to say that one of the things that we are looking at doing is undertaking an equality and human rights screening impact assessment. But we feel that actually it's an enhancement in respect of the current service offer, and therefore it should be a positive impact on those receiving health and social care services rather than a negative.
I was on mute. Thank you, Tracy. One of the things we did discuss before I invite questions at the briefing this morning was that we quizzed John on whether or not the process was, from a governance perspective, was streamlined enough for John and the rest of the team to make quick decisions to the benefit of residents. And I know, John, you said you'd say a few words on that to give reassurance to the rest of the committee and the public that you felt that was the case.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. So as Tracy's outlined, the overall governance sign-off on behalf of the County Council will be through the Health and Wellbeing Board. That also provides us with involvement and authorisation from health partners. Underneath the Health and Wellbeing Board, of course, we have an integration executive, which is a group of officers who can then oversee any kind of policy or strategic arrangements that the Health and Wellbeing Board put in place, can then be dealt with through the integration executive. And that then can be delegated straight down into the department and into those health organisations like Leicestershire Partnership Trust, who are likely to be our key partners in delivering this. So in terms of the actual process itself, once we go through the approval process, there shouldn't be any bar or any barriers to how we deliver this in effect for individual people's care.
Right, thank you for that, John. Mr. Mear.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate, I think this is a good report, again, a good partnership working. I think this is the way we should be working. I had a question around the timeline, because obviously it says everybody's busy with COVID. Is this something that we're going to deliver for next year or the year after? Because it seems like we need to deliver it as soon as possible, but getting everybody around the table and getting it all signed off might be a problem or cause a problem. And my second point was on the equality, and I think Tracy right at the end signed it off. I think it is an enhancement to the service, so hopefully it will be a positive. But are we going to monitor it as well to see what the positive impact is in respect of not financial, because I think we can always save money, but also how people go through the system, how they're approached, how they go through the system, and where they end up, and if there is a real benefit to that.
Yeah, do you want me to come in, John, if that's okay? So in respect of the governance and sign off, we already have alluded to it. Paragraph 11 is have a process in place that is in line with the current health and social care protocol are getting that shared care signed off. So workers across MDTs, where possible, will generate a shared care form, and it will look at apportioning responsibilities to health or social care and also pick up on the funding elements. So in respect of the adult social care management system, we've built a funding mechanism into the background that can do that. It would be fair to say that across LLR, health and social care, that we have those bi-weekly meetings where we discuss cases, and then the care's apportioned, because the other thing at the minute is obviously to pick up that healthcare is free at the point of delivery. So we have to look at people not being charged for their healthcare tasks. And the other element is that what we'd want to do as part of any review of those people receiving that level of support as a review mechanism at an MDT level is to review that they understand that it's a coordinated service and it should be seamless. So they shouldn't see that the person who's coming in to support them in respect of management of their medication is a different person who's helping them to support them with their personal care aspects. So we can do that as part of the review process, and it's part of our delivery of customer expectations and service models to seek to ask those questions.
Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you, Tracy. Mrs. Wright.
Thank you. Hello, Tracy. It was just clarification around budget. So does it mean it will be a joint budget? So if it's a coordinated service, is it a coordinated budget?
It depends potentially on the level of service that somebody's being receiving. So there are elements within the report that talk about what's ancillary, etc., to adult social care. So if a person's social care needs can be met during a duration of 2 calls a day, but there are additional tasks that are related to their healthcare elements, that proportion of that 3rd call would be costed to health and built into our system. So the person wouldn't be charged. And what happens in the background is our finance department invoice the CCGs for their component of it. And it could be that could be if somebody needs 24-hour support, it's 12 hours each, or it's just dependent on the level and level of support that person requires. Right. And the share care element builds that into that.
Thank you. May I ask another question, Mr. Chairman, please?
Of course.
Thank you. It was just around training, saying that training is really important, and at the moment we need to do a little bit more training, because it's important that if somebody is there and is available to do the assessment, that it's done correctly first time, because I'm assuming that there could be appeals or there could be disputes. How are we progressing on the training, or what contingencies are we making to ensure that the training's there?
So the training is there as an offer as it currently stands. It's work to look at future-proofing that. As it stands currently, what we have is what we call specific and generic tasks. So we have a social care workforce that can be trained to deliver what are called generic tasks. So that would be the same component delivered to any one of us in this meeting. But then we have specific training, which is tailor-made to the individual needs of a person, which is an enhanced level of training, because there are certain elements of service delivery that are more complex. So that's something that we currently have in place. And generally, the delegation of those tasks is not delegatable until the training's been delivered and received and signed off.
Right, thank you, Tracy. I don't believe there are any further hands up. So I think, as John said right at the start, it might appear a dry report, but it is a very important report. I think members have looked at it on that basis and recognised the benefits we're striving to achieve. And I think, you know, it's the right way forward and the way we would wish to see it. We appreciate there are probably hurdles en route, and I'm sure that officers will keep us advised going forward. So that is the last report today. The date of the next meeting is scheduled to take place on the 7th of June 2021 at 2 p.m. Just before I formally close the meeting, I think it would be wrong if I can be indulged by the committee just to say thank you to Richard Blunt as the portfolio holder. Whatever the result of the election, I know Richard will not be here as he's not standing for re-election. But I think I'd like to thank Richard on behalf of the committee for his attendance at these meetings. I think he's attended every meeting, or he may have missed the odd one when he may have had a nasty accident with his leg since I've been on the committee. And I think it's nice that we have the presence of the portfolio holder there who's always listened to, taken on board our comments and responded. And I think this committee would like to think that whoever takes Richard's place will do the same. So thank you, Richard, for your support of this committee, and I hope you feel the support this committee has given yourself, particularly with some challenging comments and discussions that have taken place. You put your hand up, Richard, so I'm sure you might want to respond.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It really has been an amazing process, actually. I was always not sure of how scrutiny should work, but when anybody asks you about scrutiny now, I said, just come and sit in on this scrutiny panel. I don't know how other ones work, but the relationship between the members of the committee and the chairman and officers, I always come along having learned something new, and I like the way I've been tested and questioned on some really difficult things we've dealt with, Chairman, over the last 4 years together. And I'm looking at the Liberal and Labour group members in particular staring at me now. They know the questions they've asked. Joel Mears having a laugh. But the fact is, seriously, it helped. It really does help. You do need to test cabinet members, without doubt. Full council doesn't work the same way. It hasn't got the intimacy, it hasn't got the direct response. So even doing it remotely, it's been brilliant, and I really enjoyed working with you all. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that, Richard, and best wishes for the future. Right, so that we've now come to the end of the meeting. So could I thank all members, all officers, and all members for the public who might have signed in for attending the meeting. So thank you very much, and I declare this meeting closed.
Cheers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you.